Friends, if I could have your attention for a moment. We're about to begin the service for Mr. Bernard Bernie Wilson. On behalf of the family, I want to thank everybody for joining us here in the chapel, and for those who are watching, can you hear? A little louder? Okay, a little closer. So as a gentle reminder before we begin, if we could just take a moment to turn our cell phones or any noise-making devices on silent. Officiating our service today is Rabbi Rachel Weiss from the Jewish Reconstructionist Congregation. The rabbi will now perform the ancient tradition of Kriya.
Good afternoon, everyone. So when a death occurs in our tradition, we, who are a people of symbols and signs, take that quite literally. And a tradition that goes back to ancient biblical times of when we hear or feel a death in our midst, of rending our garments, of tearing our clothes. And as a people of symbols, we tear something on the outside as a symbol of the tear that's happening on the inside. It is a rupture, it is a break, it is a tear in the fabric of who we are inside. Even if we were to stitch the tear back together, which is what happens when we mend, or when we grieve, or when we heal, there's still a scar. There's still a line or something that shows us that there was brokenness that happened in the first place. And so part of what we do as the symbol of opening up this moment of collective mourning together, of collective grief, is that what we are gathered together in community to do is to acknowledge with his family that Bernie Wilson has died. And that upon hearing of this news, or feeling this, or gathering in community together, we feel that tear, or that brokenness. And so his family members, his children, are wearing these ribbons, which symbolize a broken heart. It symbolizes that part of your heart is cracked wide open. The Psalms say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu chei ha'olamim, blessed are you, source of all life. Hakarov lenishberei lev, who is close to the brokenhearted, ve'et dachei ruach yoshia, and helps those who are feeling despair. So I'm going to ask Mark and Jenna to stand as we do this ritual of tearing. The blessing that we say is the blessing for Dayan Ha'emet, the one who knows truths. None of us knows, for sure, anything that happens post-death, post-life in this moment. But what we know is that we are part of something larger, and that we trust that there is both whatever happens in the after, and more importantly, that we are part of something that is bigger than just ourselves. The custom is that we wear that ribbon on the outside as a symbol of the brokenness that's happening on the inside. And some wear it at the funeral, some wear it through the duration of Shiva, or for the first week, the first full cycle. Some wear it for the first 30 days. Grief is not a singular moment in time. It is like a stone dropped in the water, ripples that will occur and feel as you move through this process. And all of us are here today as part of the most sacred mitzvah that we do as Jews in community, which is to be here, to gather, to show up, to remember. We are here to celebrate and also remember and mourn the fullness of the life of Bernie Wilson. To remember him as the son of Michael and Bertha, as the brother of Riva and Neil, as the father of Mark and Jenna, and father-in-law of Leslie and Aaron, as the grandpa of Jacob and Mahalia and Quincy, and as someone who lived A full life with lots of different parts and lots of different stories. As many of us have chapters in our lives where we knew him in lots of different contexts. And so what we do in a funeral service is to acknowledge the many different kinds of chapters and contexts that Bernie had and the different relationships that we had with him. You may be the holder of stories that no one else knew except for your particular moment or slice in time that you shared with him. You may be part of connections of stories that existed in relationship with others. Bernie had lots of different elements and aspects to his life, and we won't be able to tell them all in one sitting because it would be impossible to tell that many years of a life in one sitting. And so part of what we do is to acknowledge the brokenness of brokenheartedness, but also with that opening becomes an opening to tell stories and to remember. One of the hardest parts about a death and about grief is the grammar. We are used to talking about the people we love as the things we do with them, or the way that they are, or the things we're going to do with them. And what happens when a loved one dies is we start talking about how they were, or how they lived, or he was. And even that moment feels a little jarring, and feels uncomfortable, and feels painful to have to shift and adjust in a reminder of how we talk. And so we start with remembering. Rabbi Rami Shapiro wrote these words, "Like a wave arising from the ocean's dance, so do we arise from the ocean of the universe. Like a wave returning from the rocky shore, its form given to chaos, but restored in the ocean's unity, so do we return from life's end, recycled in the holiness to the dance once more. Awesome and wondrous is this dance. May all who mourn find comfort. May all who fall beneath sorrow's burden find the strength to rise and walk. Let us grant each other peace and give each other courage. Let us spread out a blanket of peace that we might aid in each other's remembering." So we remember together. We begin to tell Bernie's story. And we start with those who knew him all of your lives to this moment. And we're going to invite first Jenna to come and share some remembrances of your father.
Find out where my speech is. Okay. Hello, and thank you all for being here for me and my family, honoring my dad, or some of you may know him as Butch, Bernie, Bernard, Uncle Bernie, and Grandpa. As some of you know, my dad used to work for many years at Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company, the quiet company, which we always thought was so funny because my dad was a quiet man at times. I realized as I got older, I was similar to my dad in many ways. We were both quiet at times, but could also have fun and laughter with our friends and could even have an attitude if needed or just be direct when necessary. My dad was adventurous. One of the things he did was run marathons when I was a kid, and he would come home with icicles on his mustache. As he got older, he would go down ski slopes and hike all across the world, from Japan to Spain to Croatia to Illinois. My dad tried to teach me to be adventurous. It didn't go as planned. He took me toboggan riding in Minnesota, where I fell off, or bike riding down the hill at Northwestern campus, which was pretty scary at the time. He also tried to take me cross-country skiing, but it was too cold for me. One of the many lessons my dad taught me was to slow down, take things easy. And he always told me it's not he always told me to take it easy, to slow down. It's not brain surgery. He just take your time at doing something and try not to get so overwhelmed. Another thing he told me was to have a respectable spouse. Once when my dad came to visit me when I was living in California, we took a boat ride to Catalina Island. There was a couple sitting in front of us. The man, possibly the husband, was sitting in front of the wife, as they could both be seated by the window to look at the view. My dad told me that I should always have a husband who always sat next to me, and that's exactly what I did. Some of you might know I was very spoiled by my dad. He would take me shopping when I was young. He would sit in the waiting area and would tell me to pick out whatever I wanted. My dad also took my brother and I to piano lessons on Saturday afternoons. And then after, we would go to the bagel store, Bagel and Bialys, in Highland Park, and listen to Prairie Home Companion on our way home. Even to this day, I listen to NPR because of my dad. Me and my dad also shared similar interest in murder mysteries. Later in his life, he watched a lot of murder mysteries, especially on Acorn and BritBox, in which I became a big fan. Since my dad would let me share his subscription, I could see what shows or movies he watched, and I would watch those too, and I got great recommendations. He was also a wonderful grandpa to my children. While visiting him in Charlevoix, Petoskey, going to Mackinac Island, and of course the Gold Coast in Chicago. He took them on different modes of public transportation, such as boats, trains, cars, and buses, going to Water Tower, Chinatown, museums, and water parks. I think that's why both my kids love the city to this day. He was always very proud of his grandkids and proud of me and Mark for raising such great kids, because he was a great role model to both of us in many ways.
One of the things that Mark and Jenna were telling me and telling stories about Bernie as a grandpa was that because all of his grandkids were enough years apart that you each got to have your own unique relationship with him, and that he had adventures with each of you, but he also had a particular love for pelicans. And so Quincy and Mahalia will share with us a pelican reading in his honor. This might be a first. I don't think I've ever had a pelican poem at a funeral before. And that feels pretty appropriate, it sounds like, for Bernie.
A wonderful bird is the pelican. His bill holds more than his belly can.
He can take his in his beak and enough food for a week. But I'm damned if I see how the hell can.
So many different chapters in Bernie's life, including with each of his grandchildren, with his children who had different relationships with him, with all different ways. And I want to welcome his cousin Remy, who drove in from South Haven this morning to share some of your reflections and stories. So welcome, Remy.
I knew Bernie for 86 years. He was my older cousin. We would chat on our birthday, or his birthday first, because I gloated to the fact that he was 16 days older. We shared an apartment or a house, a two-flat. We were upstairs on Quincy Avenue in Detroit. We went to Woodhull Lake in the summers. They owned a cottage we rented. Bernie and I were classmates, graduated Mumford High School in 1957 in January. We went our separate ways for a while. He went, I believe, to Miami of Ohio, and I went to Ann Arbor. And but we reconnected in Chicago. We both moved to Chicago from Detroit about the same time. And He was a very, very close cousin, and almost, probably almost more like a brother to me. We were just very close. I'll miss our annual birthday dinners at Gene and Georgetti's that we would go every once a year for a long time. He was a great guy, a wonderful companion, a great friend. We could talk all the time. Even if we missed a month here, a month there, we would talk. And Julie and I were just so lucky to see him this summer at Truly, where he was staying. He gave us a wonderful tour. He was looking good, and he's just going to really be missed. Thank you.
One of the parts of the chapters of Bernie's later years was taking classes in the OLLI program of adult learning for older adults through Northwestern, which also included writing. And Mark discovered some of his writings that he had created and tell some of his own outlooks on the world and on life in his own words. And so I want to invite Jacob, his grandson, to come and share one of the pieces of writing that Bernie created and also some of your own memories of your grandpa.
After my grandfather's passing, we found this recollection on his computer about one of his most amazing experiences, and I'd like to share that with you. I received a postcard at my apartment with the message, "If you like standing naked in front of the frozen food section, I've got a trip for you." The card was from somebody whose name I had heard of at a men's weekend but never met. So I trusted the name and was, of course, greatly intrigued by the humor of the message. The trip was a 7-day affair on the Minnesota-Canadian border in mid-February. I flew into Eli and was picked up by one of the participants, Sandy. She had taken on 2 others before the drive along the northern shore of Lake Superior to our cabin. Sandy was a farm girl by origin and nurse by occupation. I was smitten like Gaga over her quasi-Southern accent. My early caregiver, Jean, was from Southern Missouri. The transference attachment was powerful. Accommodations were a hand-built log cabin and outhouse on Fall Lake. Seems to me there were 4 to 5 men and an equal number of women that I'd never met before. Keeping clean meant building a fire in the stove and the sauna under the cabin. We brought water from a hole in the lake ice into the sauna in large old-fashioned milk containers for hot water. We waited above in the cabin for the sauna to heat up. When the moment arrived, we were all told to take off our clothes. What? We all looked around at each other, and that's what we did. 3 or so of us at a time descended into the sauna, poured hot water on ourselves, soaped up, rinsed off, and walked out into the star-laden night, down to a hole in the ice, and jumped in. It was shocking. It wasn't just the cold and the beauty we felt. It was the fact that we would do such a thing. Needless to say, we did this every night. Dog sledding pulled by Baffin Island dogs capable of hauling 1,000 pounds were just the beginning of the thrills. The dogs were stationed in Antarctica in the Russian sector. They had been gifted to the new Minnesota owners by President Gorbachev in a detente exchange. After all, non-native animals were removed by the Antarctica signatories. Chasing radio-collared gray wolves howling at the night was truly eerie. Cross-country skiing out to the remains of a wolf pack kill of a moose was not so much. Those hungry guys didn't leave much beyond what the moose had eaten. But lastly, I do want to say a bit about the snowshoeing we did. There were no roads or trails. The paths we took were the paths we made into the forest. I'm not a religious person or even spiritual, but I've never done anything that brought me so close to nature. So there's actually a part of this story not mentioned in the written recollection by my grandfather. It was about the wolves. My father told me about this part. It was nighttime and the earth was covered in deep snow. I remember hearing about the surrounding trees, the starry night sky, the moon. His party had taken a break to rest and replenish. Their guide said they could try and howl into the dark and a wolf might howl back. At first, a few of his group tried without any response. Howl, silence. Howl, silence. I can imagine their frosty breath exhaling around them as they listened to the dark. Then their guide said he would give it a try. A much bigger howl, silence. Listen, frosty breath, silence. My grandfather said that since the guide didn't have any luck, he thought he might give it a shot. And he gave as big of a howl that he could muster as his animal sound impression echoed through the canyon. From the distance, the group heard a reply. Not just from one wolf or two wolves, but from an entire pack of wolves, filling the air with their overlapping cries of the night. Howl, howl, howl. I think in some way my Grandpa Bernie connected to something that night that not many of us get to experience in our lifetime, to call out to the wild, to reach beyond our domesticated human existence and have the wild call back to us. All of its chaotic, earthy, feral muskiness that one could only feel in their bones. My grandfather talked with wolves that night. So I struggled a bit with writing this speech. I honestly didn't know what to say when my family asked me about what I could remember about Bernie. Honestly, at first, all I could think of were his quirks. I thought about the way he would always order water without ice, and that hats were definitely not allowed at the table. I thought about how opinionated and outspoken he was. Bernie always followed what he wanted. He lived the life that he wanted to. He traveled to the places that he wanted to see. He took classes on subjects that he was interested in. But most of all, it was crucial to him that he spent time with the people that were important to him. I was lucky enough to be one of those people. One of the key things I remembered about Bernie was how much he listened. He was always down to hear about my problems, and he was always there for me. He may not have agreed with the path I've taken in my life, but he always supported me, and he was unbelievably caring. And a trait I loved about him was that he truly wore his emotions on his sleeve. Something I learned from my grandpa is that it's important to express your emotions. It's important to communicate. I wish I'd had more time to communicate to him how important he was to me. I loved him, but I think he knew that. And despite the fact that he didn't believe anything would happen when he was gone, I like to think that he's in a good place, somewhere in the wild, howling at wolves, skiing down some crazy mountains, and most importantly, having an unlimited amount of foreign detective dramas to watch. Bernie will always be with me, and I'm so blessed he was in my life. I love my grandpa.
And Jacob, one of the things your parents shared with me as we were talking together was just how much they loved that you and your grandpa had your own relationship, that you really had your own connection and would go out of your way to make your own plans with each other independent of them to seek that connection, and just how special and meaningful that was. They knew to you, but also they knew to him. So one of the lovely and quirky things about Evanston is that so many people meet their future spouses when they're, say, in middle school, which is definitely a trope here or in high school here in the Wilson Bonner family. Is very much where communities and families grow up together and become very much intertwined together. And so, Leslie, you have been a part of Bernie's life, not just as a daughter-in-law by marriage, but from a long time before. So we want to invite you to come and share some thoughts and memories of Bernie.
Actually, for Mark and I, it was nursery school. In the past week, we have spoken a lot about Bernie, who he was, how he lived, what we remember about him, what we cherished about him. I never believed we would be here today. In the last couple years of his life, he was always the man that defied what his doctors would tell him. You only have this long on this medication. If you make it to this day, you will be in this percentage of people who have made it this far. And then he stepped defiantly over that line and pushed on to the next. Today, we are honoring Bernie. And the best way I can think about him is that he was a soul who understood the world best by walking through it. His life wasn't measured in years alone, but in the miles that he hiked. And as a hiker, I think he embodied so much of what it meant to be a real hiker. Bernie knew what it meant to listen more than he spoke. I mean, as Jenna said, he did devote his entire career to a company known as the Quiet Company. Hikers who listen more than they speak often find a deeper connection with nature and those around them. The trail teaches patience, awareness, and respect, lessons that are best absorbed in silence. In conversation, too, a good hiker knows that listening reveals more than talking ever could, stories and wisdom. He moved with purpose, but never hurried, for he understood that nature sets its own pace, and we are only visitors passing through. He walked gently, always aware that the land was not his to take, but to respect. As hikers say, leave no trace, take only memories, and that's how Bernie lived. He didn't keep things, those he gave away. Instead, he delighted in a good joke, a retelling of a story, and especially being with Jacob, Mahalia, and Quincy. As hikers know, through sun and storm, through easy paths and steep climbs, he would have to adapt, endure, and carry on, knowing that the weather will change, and so must we. I can imagine him as he faced each journey with courage, because he understood that fear and wonder are siblings, that the vastness of the world can humble you, but it can also fill you with awe. Funny enough, I always imagine him on those steep climbs through wind and rain and dirt and snow in a bow tie. Always in a bow tie. The places he went were not just places he traveled through, but pieces of who he was. He brought back new friendships, some beautiful photos, a couple of broken bones, and some really cool coins. He rarely brought back things, just himself, changed even more toward the man I think he truly wanted to be. I think it's said that to a hiker we don't say goodbye, for a hiker never truly walks alone. The ones before, the ones after, the ones beside him, the path is shared, and Bernie is still with us. I can still hear his giggle. I can still heed his sound advice. I can still see him light up when we walk into a room, and I can still see in his family the legacy of an honestly good man.
And Mark, it's your turn. We'll welcome Mark to come and talk about your dad.
Thank you all for being here. I want to share with you some of my father's stories. Some of it you've heard. I know all of you, knew him in different ways. My father had a life like many men of his generation, growing up during a Second World War and the grandchild of immigrants. He was exposed to two worlds: the world of unspoken trauma of his grandparents escaping the hardships of the shtetl, still only speaking Yiddish, and growing up as an American Jewish boy, AKA Butch to his buddies, in a primarily Jewish neighborhood on the northwest side of Detroit. With his older sister Riva and younger brother Neil and cousin Remy and other relatives nearby, he grew up in a brick house on Pennington Avenue with their parents, Bertha and Michael, or as us grandkids later called them, Nana B and Papa Mickey. He listened to the Lone Ranger on the radio and later watched Uncle Milty on the television. He danced in his socks in the basement to his father's Wurlitzer jukebox. My dad attended Mumford High School, which became pretty famous when Eddie Murphy wore a Mumford t-shirt in the movie Beverly Hills Cop. Thank you, Eddie Murphy. For college, he attended Miami University of Ohio. There, my father would join a fraternity and make friends that would last him a lifetime. By the 1960s, he moved to Chicago and joined the Marine Corps Reserves. He lived in the Hyde Park neighborhood near the Museum of Science and Industry and got his first dog. In those early days, he worked as a substitute teacher and had a part-time job at Sears. Later, he married my mother, Bonnie, and 4 years after I was born, growing up on Oakdale and Broadway in the up-and-coming neighborhood of Lakeview. My mother, father, his beautiful black and white speckled Dalmatian Seton, and baby me in our third-floor walk-up. A few weeks ago, I caught my father laughing to himself lying in bed while I was rubbing his sore, inflamed hands. I asked him what was funny, and he recounted those early days when I was a baby, when he used to pick me up in his arms, go out the apartment back door, walk down the wooden back porch steps through the alley, and then carry me around the block to help me fall asleep. Now I was taking care of him. Back in those days, he took countless photographs and slides and was never far from his 8mm movie camera, chronicling our lives for years. A few years later, we moved to Evanston, where my sister Jenna was born. A big, beautiful house, kitty corner to a large Daniel Burnham designed brick school building where I would attend kindergarten. My father worked downtown at the Merchandise Mart as an account executive for WMAQ NBC Radio. I remember my mother driving us to pick him up from work in our boxy Volvo station wagon, pulling up in front of that long line of rectangular stone columns topped with the heads of important men. I didn't know who they were, but I remember thinking, I wondered when my father's head would appear at the top of one of those columns, because surely he was a great man and deserved such status. His balding head and pointed nose forever frozen in stone by the Chicago River. A few years later, my dad joined an agency for Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance, working in an Art Deco skyscraper just down the street from the stock exchange on LaSalle. My sister and I always had a good time visiting his office. We especially loved looking through his bottom desk drawer filled with treats like candy bars, saltine crackers, matchbooks from client lunches, and other odd delights. Secretly for me, it was my trips to the men's washroom down the hall where I learned at a certain age that I could find dirty magazines in the large wastebasket underneath the crumpled paper towels. My dad always seemed delighted when we visited him, never annoyed, and always playful. Even when I'd show up after a men's room visit with an undisclosed folded magazine tucked under my arm, like it was any other magazine a 9-year-old businessman would carry. He never shamed me, just giggled. He stayed with that agency until he retired 40 years later, earning a seat at their distinguished $1 million roundtable. And I only recently learned that when he first started out at Northwestern, he found the work just as challenging, if not harder, than his year in the Marine Corps boot camp at Parris Island. Go figure. After his first dog, Seton, passed, he surprised us with a beautiful Great Pyrenees puppy he named Bijou de Neige, Jewel of the Snow, or Fluffy for short. My dad loved that dog. She went with us on family trips to our Pink Landing cottage in Wisconsin and led all of the birthday and 4th of July parades in our neighborhood. I mean, who didn't want a polar bear as a pet and show her off around the block? Occasionally, Fluffy would break free of the giant, imposingly tall wire fence kennel my father built around the backside of our house. Fluffy was never too hard to find, though. Imagine a very large, four-legged neighbor with long white fur strolling down Chicago Avenue near Dempster, looking for the latest sale at Crawley's True Value Hardware, or dumpster diving behind the Kentucky Fried Chicken across the street for a delicious paw-licking good treat. Fluffy epitomized everything good about our father, despite his lack of fur. Sweet and kind, playful, and like Fluffy, occasionally surprising us with little gifts. But instead of chewed up chicken legs, he brought us airport gift shop souvenirs from his adventures on business trips. His love for his animals never waned. From regal Chester, aka Chesty, our tuxedo two-tone cat, white and gray cat Tippy with his gray spotted nose, to his more recent cats, Charlie and Pookie, that my dad adored. Then there was the tortoise that my dad accidentally ran over with his lawnmower. Amazingly, the tortoise survived. He only nicked the top of its shell. My dad promptly named him Lawn Boy after his gasoline-powered mower. Why there was a desert animal strolling through our high grass during Evanston's bright spring is still a mystery to me. And then, after a year, in an act of very, very slow revenge, the tortoise tried to burn our house down. and it did this by pushing its heat lamp into the plexiglass habitat my father had built for him. He only set fire to the wall in our den, but survived that incident as well. We promptly got rid of evil lawn boy Knievel, to the disappointment of Jenna and me. Mostly, I just wanted to see what he would survive next. As Jenna mentioned, our father loved adventures, or to be more accurate, he loved being an adventurer. Although growing up with him, this wasn't always apparent in our home, despite his daredevil pets. Yes, we had our share of exciting family vacations, staying in a tree house at Disney World, Mackinac Island and its fudge-eating tandem bicycle rides, me at 7 grabbing a big brown snake, slithering into a log by the tail and refusing to let go until my father convinced me they wouldn't allow us to take it home on the ferry from Washington Island. So, did I want to go home with him or live with the snake in the woods? Needless to say, it was a difficult decision. We saw goats eating grass on the roof of Al Johnson's Swedish restaurant in Door County, and of course, stopping at Wilson's Ice Cream, and our many family visits to tropical Detroit. But I realized as I got older, there was a lot more my father wanted to accomplish, a lot more that my father wanted to become. And after our parents' divorce, he did just that. Similar to the many hermit crabs we had as kids that outgrew their shells, my father made a new home for himself in a variety of apartments around the area, shedding each one as he outgrew them, making a new life for himself. It was a life that I could only stand back and look at with wonder. He still wore his business suits and nicely pressed shirts and bow ties by day, like a coat of gabardine armor off to hunt for the day's referrals. But on the weekends, he was off to Colorado to downhill ski, or once he took a road trip to find the family of the woman who had raised him when he was very little, his nanny, Jean. Our father had never done anything like this before. Who was this guy? Now, he did like to cross-country ski and was a jogger back in the day when jogging was thought of as a kooky new way to stay in shape. From our house, he would run the 10 miles round trip to the Kenilworth Balls, just past Plaza del Lago and back, stopping along the way by the same rocks on the landfill we had biked and skied by countless times for his pit stop. But here he was, years later, telling my sister and me about the mountains he had recently skied down, traveling with his skiing group he joined with for many, many years to come. And after retirement from his beloved NML, these trips led to his hiking adventures around the world. As Jenna mentioned, Czechoslovakia, Japan, even California, cleaning hiking trails for others to enjoy. This lifestyle would become par for my father's course, each year filled with a few skiing trips, far-off hiking adventures, and world exploration. I believe to obtain this skill of putting himself out into the world, opening himself up to new possibilities, taking the road less traveled. Years earlier, my father had taken what might have been one of his biggest challenges upon himself, redefining himself as a man. My dad never took solace in organized religion or sports or vices, never hung out with a group of guys. So it surprised me when in the late 1980s, he participated in a men's weekend called the New Warrior Training Adventure. He never told me what they did on that mysterious weekend, but I could see when he returned, there was something different about him. In my judgment, he was a new kind of man, the same father, but different. I saw something in him I'm not sure I had seen before, or maybe little glimpses of. He was at peace with himself. His cynicism, some of the hard edge he carried, had melted away. At one point, I even saw him and my mother holding hands. Holding hands! That was a new experience for me, and I tell you, it was weird and strange. A few years later, I went on the same weekend. My father never cajoled or even encouraged me to go, but I had to know more about what made him a softer and more nurturing man and father. A man among men with integrity, self-worth, and kindness to us and himself. My father not only staffed the weekend I later went on, but we ended up in a weekly group together with other men from the weekend he attended, supporting each other and helping to hold each other accountable for the positive changes we wanted to see in our lives. I saw my father hold a fierceness balanced with his love and support for the men in that group in a way I had never known before. I believe it allowed him to find love and intimacy in his life again, to socialize and make friends, and to expand his world beyond what he had known and experienced. Everyone in this room is here because of the relationship you had with our Father. His warm smile, his bright blue eyes, a man who could really see you and wasn't afraid to engage you in thoughtful conversation. My father was complex and simple, an introvert who loved to get out into the world, a puzzle solver of crosswords, thousands and thousands of solved crosswords, to his more recent favorite detective shows. Always looking for the next answer, wanting to uncover the next mystery, a man with a light touch from his collection of many sharpened crossword pencils, along with a cut-to-the-bone sense of pragmatism that never wavered. He was our father, spouse, brother, uncle, cousin, agent, and friend, ski mate, hiking mate, and peaceful warrior. He will forever be Bernie, the man who altered the course of his destiny, carried his life's burdens like a light pack on his back, and with a wink, pointed the way for us to follow in his footsteps. A path of kindness, compassion, and unconditional love. I loved him and will greatly miss him and his counsel. My father uncovered the mysteries of his life. It's dark and it's light, and he wasn't afraid to embrace all of it. He will forever live in our hearts.
As Bernie had so many facets, and these have been such beautiful reflections, a mosaic of all of the different parts of his life. As I chant the 23rd Psalm, which is often we do at funerals because it encapsulates some of the feelings we have in these moments of loss, of what does it mean to come to the end of life and be perhaps alone, to look around and say, I am accompanied, I am surrounded. And surrounded here by memories, surrounded by maybe for some the divine presence, surrounded by love. And one of the things that Bernie so desired was to make sure that you all were taken care of and that you all were loved and that everyone here could be together in this way. The 23rd Psalm. And I invite you, as these words in Hebrew are chanted, to think about your own relationship, your own history, or your own place in any of these stories. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, Binot asher yarbitzeni, Al mei menuchot yenachaleni. Nafshi yeshovev, yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit salmavet, lo hirara, ki atahim hadi, shivtecha, o mishantecha, shivtecha, o mishantecha, hema yenachamoni, taroch lefanai shulchan, taroch lefanai shulchan, taroch lefanai shulchan, neged zorerai, dishanta vashemen roshi, dishanta vashemen roshi, dishanta vashemen roshi, kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed, yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, veshavti beveit Adonai, veshavti beveit Adonai, leorech yamim. The English translation reminds us of being out in nature, of finding the things that support us and comfort us, and all of the things that make our lives and our experiences overflow. Much as you describe, a hiker or an adventurer might go off, but look for the things to anchor themselves and to hold on to. The Eternal is my shepherd, I shall never be in need. Amidst the choicest grasses do you set me down. You lead me by the calmest waters and restore my soul. You take me along paths of righteousness in keeping with the honor of your name. Even should I wander in the valley of the darkest shadows, I will not be afraid. For you are with me. Your power and support are there to comfort me. You set in front of me a table in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup is overflowing. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall come to dwell inside the house of the Eternal for a length of days. Part of remembrance and part of memory is that we keep telling stories, that we keep talking, we keep sharing these experiences for the many chapters of each of our lives. And one of the things that happens at a memorial service is that it makes us look at our own lives and say, where have I been? What have my chapters been? How have my relationships evolved and grown over time? How have I changed? Where are these moments? And to look and say, where are the moments that I want to do more? Where are the moments that I feel inspired? Where are the moments that I could take up that mantle that I heard today and carry it forward and carry it with me? What do I want to teach as the legacy to my children? What did I inherit or what did I gain? How am I remembering this beloved person in my life? Part of what you've had the opportunity to do as Bernie moved from his place on the Gold Coast up to Evanston, and he needed more support from all of you, but you had the gift of being more proximal to him, is to think about the ways that you could be closer, or you could be more present, and that he could be more present in your lives and be more present for you. And to think about what are the ways that we can continue to be more present for each other, and to be here for each other, and to be connected, and to ask what we need from each other and to keep giving it. One of the things you said is that he wanted you to know that you were loved, to know that you had his attention, to know that you were stable in all the different meanings of that word, whether it was financial, whether it was emotional, whether it was collectively, that you were going to be okay. And part of that was to make sure his presence and to continue to pay and pass that on in your lives as a tremendous gift. The two pieces of liturgy that we conclude a memorial service or funeral with, one is about the ascension or rising of the soul. Jewish tradition teaches us that the body as a vessel is one element of what it is to be human, but the part that makes us the individual people that we are, the wonderful and complicated and quirky and beautiful and difficult and varied and vast human beings that we are, is made up individually for each of us in our soul. And it comes into us when we inhale for the very first time at our birth, and it leaves us when we exhale for the very last time at our death. And we pray that it rises and ascends and goes back to the place that all souls come from in many ways, like the psalmist teaches about streams of water that all flow back to the ocean, which is never full because the ocean has the capacity to hold all of the water and is affected by its leaving and by its return. And so we pray that Bernie's soul returns to that part of the fabric from which it comes. And as we opened with the cracking and tearing open of our hearts, that when your heart is torn wide open, it also has the capacity to receive. And that we receive a part of Bernie's soul and a part of the essence of who he was in your memories to carry around with us. And just like that torn ribbon is a symbol of being able to be open to hold and receive him now in a different way. And following that, we say Mourner's Kaddish, which is, in our tradition, a memorial prayer, although that prayer is not about death. We associate it with death because we say it in memory, but it's actually about goodness and life. It's actually about the beauty and the holiness. That's what Kaddish means, the holiness that exists in the world. Maybe the holiness that Bernie saw while he was hiking in trails, maybe the holiness he saw when he was sitting and watching Mysteries with you, the holiness that he saw on the bus around the Gold Coast when he was taking his grandchildren on adventures, all of the different ways that he experienced the goodness of the world, and we say it in his memory because he's no longer alive to say it for himself. And so we say it remembering the goodness that lived in him. So I invite you to rise in body or in spirit for these two blessings. The first, El Malei Rachamim, as we pray for the rising, the ascent, the return of Bernie's soul. And then we'll say Mourner's Kaddish together. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen B'amromim, Hamtzeh Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'malot Kedoshim U'Tehorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Baruch Ben Yerachmiel Uvasha, Shehalach Le'olamo. Ana Bal Harachamim, Hastirehu B'Seter Knafecha Le'olamim, Utzror B'Tzror HaChaim Et Nishmato. Adonai Hu Nachalato, Ve'yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo, Ve'nomar Amen. God, filled with compassion, dwelling in the heavens' heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your presence, amid the ranks of the holy and pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies, the soul of Bernie Wilson, who has gone to his eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of compassion, shelter him beneath your wings eternally and bind his soul among the living, that he may rest in peace. And we say, Amen. And together on the backside of your program are the words of Mourner's Kaddish, which we now say for the first time in Bernie's memory. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach chirutei ve'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon, uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'gala uvizman kariv ve'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach leolam ulalnei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, v'yithaleh, v'yithalal, shmei dekudsha, brichu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru, Amen. Ose shalom, shalom, shalom bimromav. Uyase shalom aleinu. Ose shalom, shalom, shalom bimromav. Uyase shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru Amen. May the one who makes peace in the farthest reaches of the universe make peace and bring comfort to all of those who are mourning. And we say, Amen. Zichrono livracha, may Bernie's memory always be a blessing. Amen.
Friends, you may be seated for just a moment. Friends, this does conclude our service here at the chapel. The family's invited everybody to join them in Shiva just across our lobby in the North Chapel in just a few moments. Memorial contributions in Bernie's memory can be made to the American Heart Association or to Breakthrough T1D. That information is available on the service folder you received on the way in, and they're available on the way out as well. And for those who are watching online, that information is available on the funeral home website. At this time, I'm going to have the family please rise, along with everybody else. We're going to escort the family across to begin Shiva. Give them just a couple moments just so they can collect themselves, and of course, then they'll... Oh, go ahead.
And one thing I failed to mention that you'll find on the tables at Shiva, bags of animal crackers that are spread out on each of the tables, which we invite you to take and enjoy in Bernie's memory. He was known to say, quote, "When things go south, put him by the rocks with a box of animal crackers." I'm not sure we're taking that literally about any of the other parts. I can't speak to that. But the animal crackers, we invite you to please enjoy. That's why those are on the tables. So we'll give the family a chance to take a few minutes for themselves, and everyone else can join us in the North Lobby, in the North Chapel, to greet the family momentarily. Thank you.